All right, this is exciting because we're talking LA, California to Tbilisi, right? Georgia.
Tbilisi, Georgia.
Tbilisi, that's
Say
right,
that 10
Tbilisi,
times
Georgia.
fast.
And this isn't like we said, Georgia, Georgia. This is Georgia. And
Yeah, Sakartvelo.
so welcome, Colin, to the Leaders Who Care series. It's awesome to have you here, and I'm looking forward and our audiences to hearing about your experiences, your accomplishments, and everything going on in Georgia. So great to have you here. Can you start by briefly introducing yourself? And men get this less than women. The first thing they usually do is tell about their work. We'll get into all that in a minute. Tell us about Colin, where you're from originally, where you are now, your family, maybe something you've never told anybody you want to reveal to the world now. That's always interesting. Share a little bit.
No pressure on that last one. Wow.
No.
Yeah, so Colin Donohue. I grew up in the Boston area early on when my folks were in school in Cambridge, and then moved out into the suburbs. Since then, kind of bounced around California, Ohio, Vermont, different places. So
Mhm.
now, I now live in Tbilisi, Georgia, with my wife Anna, who is from Georgia, mixed Ukrainian and Georgian, and our two kids, Nicholas and Daniel, who arrived 8 years ago, both at the same time.
Oh, twins?
And both while we were in Georgia. Yeah, twin boys. They're very different, so they're not identical twins. They're fraternal.
Love it.
But yeah, so we've been here 9 years in Georgia, and they've been here 8, so they're catching up with us.
Were they born in Georgia?
Yeah, yeah, they've actually never been outside Georgia so far, so we
Wow.
do need to take them back stateside at one point, but yeah.
So I always ask people from Boston this: are you a Bruins fan?
Well, when I was growing up, I was very much a Celtics fan.
Hmm.
It was back in the day, and then Sox. But yeah, Bruins. Sure, I'm not as much a devotee as my Canadian friend here, who drags me to watch the ice
Oh, I love
on
the
TV.
Canadian friend, which he'd get along with me well because I'm a Montreal and Florida Panthers fan and a big hockey fan, so that's why I asked. But they play
Ah,
hockey
okay.
in Georgia?
No, they really don't. It's
All
it's
right, well,
hard, very hard to find ice here. Traditionally, Georgia's very strong in rugby, like super strong in rugby, and had a really impressive showing in the European Cup in football, or as we say, soccer.
right.
So those are two big ones, and then the paddle is sweeping Georgia. So that's all the rage these days.
I like it. So, congrats on the Georgian wife and the kids. That's fantastic. And
Yeah,
with respect to
not
kids,
Boba.
what were you like as a little kid? And you did a lot of diverse stuff when you were in high school, even prior. So what were you like as a little kid and now basically a big kid?
Yeah. So it was interesting when I grew. My early days were on campus at Westgate when my folks were in school at MIT, and so it was really cool because the arrangement of the grad student housing, there were apartment buildings all around this central area. There was playgrounds and so on and so forth. So it was a very it was in the city, right? But it was a very protected kind of place, and kids were very sort of free to roam around, and the parents just sort of hung out on the perimeter and watched them. So I was a pretty free spirit, sort of back in the day. And then even when we moved out to the suburbs, I went to sort of an open classroom type of setting. So I didn't really feel the boot on my neck until middle school. So
Oh,
by
good.
then I was already habituated to being a bit of a free spirit.
It almost sounds the way you describe it almost sounds like towns were structured way back when the center town hall and promenade and whatnot and everybody around and that's where everybody got together.
Yeah, it was like the Commons. It
Right.
was like the Commons. Yeah, and yeah, it was a very good design. It was actually interesting because it was also the military has a similar kind of feel to,
Hmm.
like, the family is all kind of in one place, and the kids kind of just run around. But yeah, I think it may have gotten me into my later interest in intentional communities, which pops up in a later episode.
A later episode. Well, that's kind of why I asked, because I've found so often, not only doing this series, but the thread between things people do as a little kid that's just a passion that comes up and continues, and may not be, as we
Mhm.
talked before, a straight line. It might be a zigzag getting there, but it
Yeah.
seems to get there. And did you realize early on that, from your education, from that type of life that you had then, that you like solving problems, you like bringing people together?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I definitely liked challenges, and especially when I got a little bit older, I really liked challenges. So I would take, even like just like a physical activity, whether it's sort of darts or hacky sack or something like that. I would just work and work and work and work until I got to a certain level, and then I always enjoyed sort of, you know, intellectual things, a little bit of philosophy, and a little bit of, although my parents were both engineers. So there was a very specific sort of subculture that I grew up in. And I always thought I would grow up to be an engineer, because that's what you did, when you grew up. And actually, this is an interesting sort of transformative moment. So all my friends were the computer nerds as I was
Hmm.
back in the day. And I won't give more details because it makes me feel old. But there was one day where we were sitting there. We were working out a program in BASIC or whatever it was, and we'd been in this sort of dark room all day and staring at the screen. And I sort of look out, and it's a bright, sunny day, beautiful spring day, and I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, this is not what we should be doing. And then literally at that moment, I just decided I was not going to just sit in front of a screen for my career. So
Well,
I
that
still do a lot of that now, but yeah,
yeah, but it's an interesting inflection point that we all have these at times, that something hits at a certain moment, and it may not even impact right away, but it does in the future. And
yeah,
things, they say things happen for a reason, and they probably do, and what we do with them is another story. So you have a lot of really interesting, experiences, if you will, from herding goats to your education to carpentry, and you name it. So you have engineered stuff, so your parents can be proud of that in that sense. Can With respect to that, I'd love to go over some of the experiences, and hear some of the experiences you've had and some of the
sure.
accomplishments you've had. And I know we probably can't go over all of them, but starting with a couple, like, share with us a little bit what rural action was.
Yeah. So that was another big inflection point in my life. I had been a bit of an activist, kind of
Shocking.
hardcore. Yeah. And in the 90s, a lot of us were very concerned about global warming, very concerned about sort of Amazonian deforestation, like a lot of these things that, really had a bad impact. And now more people are waking up to, okay, climate change is a real thing and it's
Is
causing
it
lots and
really?
lots of suffering. Yeah. If yeah. It's very interesting times we live in with the extremes. Um, so yeah, so at the time we were very frustrated that, humans knew from a scientific perspective what was going on, but there were entrenched interests that were sort of keeping folks from really grappling with those needs. So anyways, I was a bit of an activist for a while. I will sort of leave it at that. And I had a very interesting experience. I actually had gone to Southeast Ohio because it was the place that had the most interesting, like, intentional communities.
No.
So not like communes, but like just, people, owning property together and farming and doing different activities.
Hmm.
And so it was very interesting community. They owned 100 acres land and had different houses. They had like a common house where several people lived, and they had individual houses where like families would live. And yeah, it was just very interesting. Off a lot of mostly off the grid. They had a lot of solar and wind and their own water system
Wow.
and stuff like that. Uh, so that was really interesting to connect with them. But I needed to have a job, and so I tried to hire on with a construction crew, and I didn't quite hit what they were looking for.
No.
And somebody said, "Oh, you really should go talk to Carol at Rural Action." And so that was the path to me becoming a Vista volunteer. So for 2 years at Rural Action, I served the country, helping helping rural communities in Appalachia, in Ohio.
I love
So
that, because it's not always, we talked a little bit of this example, it's not always a direct line, but you had the open-mindedness, if you will, to go
mhm.
into that, and then something good happened from that that wasn't necessarily expected.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of it was Carol Cure. She was the founder of Rural Action and the director, and sort of my boss. And I ended up around 10 years at Rural Action, going from Vista to
Mhm.
developing funding for a program, coming on as coordinator, developing more program, coming on as director over a larger area, and just sort of had this trajectory where it opened up new opportunities and ended up being the executive director of a national network of organizations. So yeah, it was very interesting because it was sustainable development. So instead of like advocacy and sort of like fighting over things, it was more about how do you get people together to solve problems and meet the different needs. So
What
it's
a
like people need, yeah,
what a novel concept. Instead of fighting over things, actually solving problems.
yeah, yeah. So that's much more my happy place, actually.
Well, and good for Carol, in seeing that in you, I would think, as well, and giving you that
Mhm.
opportunity, right?
Yeah. And she was extremely insightful and had very, very well read on sustainable development and participatory development. And there's a lot of literature around like how humans can help communities and other humans um, develop things in a positive way, in sort of a earth friendly, a little bit more just or inclusive way, and so on and so forth. So everything from Herman Daly and his critique as a World Bank person about how things are organized in the sort of development field to much more participatory development people. She was also just a very, very deeply spiritual person, not in a preachy kind of way,
Mhm.
but you could just feel that there was something deep about her, and she's somebody you would want to learn from. And so I became more open to kind of spiritual thing, sort of a Quaker, not very not very orthodox kind of thing, but just like being quiet and looking for insights, waiting for insights. But yeah, it was a very, very, very transformative process for me, actually.
Well, if you go back to the openness you talked about as a kid, how the thread might be there that you were open-minded to first even take that opportunity. You could have, stayed with the construction crew and not gone there. You could have not, not be influenced by her. And I'm not just making this up. There's definitely a thread
Yeah.
that happens in these things. And how did that lead then to Bali and what you did in Bali?
Well, yeah, I had sort of become a bit of a known person in the community-based and sustainable forestry world. One of the biggest foundations at the time funding community-based forestry around the world was Ford Foundation, and
Hmm.
not related to the Ford Motor Company. It was a
Right,
long standing international foundation with a lot of history around poverty alleviation and peace
right.
and different things. So they brought leaders from around the world to the World Summit on Sustainable Development process in, I guess it was 2002, something like that. And so they brought us to the big meeting in Joburg, South Africa, and they brought us to Bali for PrepCom for the last of the preparatory meetings before the heads of state come and sign documents. So it's where the actual kind of the work gets done before
Sure,
the
right.
the the spectacle. And
Yeah,
so
no,
I just
no, go ahead.
yeah, so I just met some very interesting people, and Some of the community-based forestry and agriculture people, showed us around Bali, and it was very interesting for me as an American who hadn't really touched ground and understood kind of the reality that people live in some places. And there are farmers growing 3 crops of rice in one of the most productive ecosystems, like hand transplanting individual, rice seedlings, 10,000 per acre or something. Like just
Wow.
really, really working very, very hard and
Hmm.
extremely productive, making $500 a year. And I was like, okay, I can make an impact here. I wasn't sure quite how. I had made a friend and traveled around looking for like the old varieties of Balinese rice, the red rice, and was thinking about how to do things around the traditional food staple varieties and stuff like that. But anyway, I ended up going off, and a couple years later, a year later, I can't remember the timeline, but there was a bombing in Kuta, this nightclub in Bali, terrorist bombing, and the Balinese economy is very much based on tourism, and it just dried up. And so my friends there were in a very bad situation, and people around them were in a very bad situation. And so the person who showed me around, he knew a lot of people who were artists, and I just, wired him the money that I had, everything I had to my name, and said, buy arts, attire, gifts, and jewelry. And sure enough, instead of just taking the money and living for the next 10 years or however long he could have lived, he did the right thing. And he had absolutely there's no way I could compel him to do the right thing. I had no influence over him. I had no power over him. But I figured, if he does the right thing, then we have a relationship we can build on, because I know I can trust him.
Hmm.
And if he runs off with the money, then I tried.
Right.
So we worked together for a number of years. I started a business, Bali Karma, and it was very much sort of my effort to be of service to the world, and a lot. So I worked in the shop. I would talk to customers about sort of global income disparities and the importance of using your resources, your money, along with your values, and finding ways to do that, whether it's fair trade chocolate or coffee or whatever it is,
Sure.
just doing things that build the world that you want to inhabit. And so one of my customers,
I figured.
my dharma, was later became my wife, Anna. Uh, so that's a whole
That
nother
was the plan, right?
episode. Yeah,
Who would have thought?
but it was.
Who would have thought Bali and karma were two words that could be put together? I mean, really, right?
Was very interesting back in the day. I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but it's just amazing the kind of spiritual depth and how the ceremonies in Bali are used for social cohesion,
Yeah.
to reinforce trust and do everything to distribute water for irrigation, and it's a super interesting society.
Yeah.
I think it's a little different now, but
Yeah, I've been there once, and it hit home with me too. Certain parts of it for sure, and even the planting of rice in the rice fields they've got there, even that we saw pretty incredible. I'm going to go fast forward a little bit because
sure.
of time, but
Yeah,
totally
yeah,
different startup grind that you were
yeah.
involved with. And I'd really like to know the influence from people you met from Startup Grind, how that affected you, and what it was about, but how the people you met, similar to what you just talked about, meeting your wife and other great people in different ways that you've been around. How did that happen with Startup Grind?
Yeah. I like to say I'm pretty spoiled because I hang out with the best people in Georgia.
Nice. Why not?
Because we were working in the space around startups and technology entrepreneurship, and we were doing it as a voluntary service, right? Like we weren't doing it as a business or anything. It was just community building, and so we attracted really, really amazing people. So one of the people that I ended up being co-directors with at Startup Grind was Georgi Tukashvili, or Gio. who's again really remarkable. This is the most amazing person I've ever worked with. Kind of quite a bit younger than me, but still very accomplished. Super smart, and also just very much about service and personal development and helping empower others and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So we ended up for, I don't know, like around 8 years or something, 7 or 8 years working together. And so Startup Grind is just a network of voluntary chapters in different cities. At the time, there were 600 chapters around the world. And one time a year, there was Startup Grind Global, where some of the chapter directors who were able would come to Silicon Valley for a big conference, a 10,000 person conference.
Wow.
And so we, yeah. So we, make a long story short, Gio and I ended up bringing a delegation of Georgian founders to Startup Grind, totally bootstrapped. We at one point were in a 2-bedroom Airbnb with like 8 guys in there, and it was
Yeah.
just just couches and floors and everything. It was very, very grassroots. But out of that, we did 2 meetings. One was chapter directors, and so we hosted a party with Georgian wine. For Georgia's the birthplace of wine. I think it's very important to say.
Of course.
So Georgian wine that we got, in partnership with the embassy, which was kind of cool. And then, so chapter directors, then we did one for Georgian diaspora. So diaspora dinner, as we called it. And it was a small number, but serious people. I don't know, Zaza Pachulia, who played for the Golden State Warriors. Now he's on the business side of Golden State Warriors. A very nice investor. He's very studious and really studies up and does a lot of good stuff around early stage investing.
Smart.
George Arison, who was at the time had just raised like $50 million from Goldman Sachs, and kind of like serious people who knew serious people.
Right. No.
But they're Georgian, right? And so they have a natural heart for helping other Georgians.
Right.
And that ended up resulting in the first exit of a Georgian company. George and some AI folks that we brought co-founded a company, and a few years later had the first little exit, 20 or 30 million or something. But it was a big deal for Georgia.
I like when people say a little exit, like 20 million, like 20 million is like no big deal, It's kind of like
More than all
robbing.
of my entire family have ever seen for all of their lives and will see for a few generations.
It's almost like lotteries where people will buy a lottery ticket for the 100 billion prize, but not for the million prize. Like that's too little for me, type of thing, and whatnot. Did all that, it must have affected you to become a founder yourself? I mean, you have Starpoint, you got Georgina Ventures, and now
Georgian
recently
Ventures.
Kernel as well. So
Yeah,
talk about how that happened and what's happening with those right now.
sure. Well, one thing that was very influential for me is just the role that I had in the startup ecosystem, right? And by various sort of luck slash hard work slash luck, ended up with a lot of connections of very interesting people. So not too long after we had that trip to Silicon Valley, we ended up having a conference in Georgia. It was like kind of the first real startup conference in Georgia. Had like a couple thousand people, it was very early days in the startup because most people didn't know what a startup really was. They didn't know what VC really was. And we brought in like 30 mostly Silicon Valley heavy hitters. So it's like, Bill Reichert from Garage, Chris Burry, friend of mine who's had 9 companies and worked in 80 countries teaching founders, but based in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
We had, just amazing people and some great VCs. Zach Coelius, who's now just, who's become a rock star VC. He was just doing syndicates then. It was early days. So that really kind of transformed the ecosystem. And I realized that I had to kind of quit my day job, if you will. I was doing digital marketing for West Coast clients, staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, like having meetings with California and Seattle people. I was like, okay. So I ended up just dedicating myself more to building the startup ecosystem. We did that one. We did another conference the next year during COVID. We had 3,200 people internationally from 260 cities. Had 110 chapter directors contributed to that. So
Wow,
ended
that's
up kind of
amazing.
on this trajectory, not by my own design, but just like you and I both, we would take an action and we would just listen for what the next step was.
Yeah.
And then we would take the next step and then next step. And So it got to the point where I was ready to do a venture fund in Georgia. So that's what Georgian Ventures was. We had 12 million committed, and
Wow.
then some things happened that made that put that back to square one, and then some things happening and made me put it on the back burner. But yeah, so it opened up a path that was a little bit different than what I'd been on before, but that I really, really like. I love unleashing the potential of people and helping them push themselves more and succeed more. Yeah, so then the Kernel, I was always, Gio became involved in Kernel. He left his job at the bank
Wow.
to go
Good
work for
recruiting.
Kernel. Yeah, yeah, and he was a true believer. And Kernel was focused in India, and the idea is, there's this amazing growth story in India, and Kernel could be part of that. Helping micro enterprises use digital tools, and then that opens up lots of good things. The data that one would have can be used for financial inclusion.
Hmm.
But yeah, as it came to pass, Gio died in a skiing accident a little over a year ago. And so, that was incredible tragedy, for, obviously his wife and his four kids and for those of us who were close to him, and also just for the whole ecosystem, because he was the shining example of a selfless servant leader. So,
Well, it
so
sounds
we've
like
done things.
you stepped up for the family though too, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the biggest asset the family had is shares in Kernel. And it was Gio's legacy. It was Gio's made him alive, enlivened him, we'll say.
Sure.
So I wanted to be honor him in the way of continuing that journey. So yeah, so we are moving Kernel forward and really looking at how we can impact not just India, but a lot of emerging markets where there's pressure from the governments to do compliance with digital reporting. And so we kind of make that easier, and we also use that data to help people get access to capital. So if you're going to do the right thing and you're going to pay your taxes, you can have transparency and be able to get access to credit better.
So is this something that any startups, anybody could contact you on wherever they are to use your service?
Yeah, I mean we're focused on a simple tool, not as many bells and whistles as some of them.
Hmm.
So it's a very economical product. But yeah, people can use it. I think it's good for like freelancers too. If you just need to do invoices once a month or keep track of who's paid and who hasn't paid and stuff like that, it can be used for that. But our big play is partnering with financial institutions in emerging markets to offer this to their customers, their business customers for free,
Hmm.
and then using the data to improve lending. So basically, we add value to the financial institution, and they give free tools to the businesses.
No, well, I bet people listening to this will I'll bet you there'll be people that will contact you on it and get
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm trying to say something here, get a kernel of hope that they'll be able to progress their own ventures. And it sounds like you've had plenty adventures with your ventures as well.
Absolutely,
But great for you for
absolutely.
keeping his legacy going and helping the family. I think that should be recognized because it is all about relationships, about people. As you've talked about, your whole journey have been about how relationships have impacted.
Yeah.
What do you envision ahead of you with respect to Kernel, but just in general, short term and long term? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah. Well, I definitely see us, getting some liquidity around Kernel in, hopefully not 15 years from now, like
Right.
hopefully, sooner, some partnerships or acquisitions or, just some way for it to, support the family and other people who've believed in it. And then for me, I have a broader mindset now. Like I'm spending time which just spend a couple weeks in India and then spend a week in Riyadh. I'm going to spend week at another conference. And I feel like there are a lot of places where they're trying to develop startup ecosystems, and they may have startups that are sort of making money and whatnot, but there's not a deep understanding of the mindset and the sort of analytical tools of a founder, and the personality characteristics and the human kind of resilience, and I don't want to say spiritual, but like resilience and health, wellness of what it takes to really go the distance in something which is excruciatingly difficult, but just wonderful.
Yeah, you're
So
preaching.
yeah, so
No, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
yeah. So one of the projects that I'm working on is with my friend Chris Burry, who's like 9-time founder. Biggest exit was 1.2 billion. Worked in 80 countries, teaching founders around the world. He moved to Georgia, just up the hill from me. We spent a lot of time together developing this global innovation dojo.
Oh,
And the
nice.
idea is to have folks who've really mastered the art and science of startups, inspiring and teaching people. The other main, so Chris and Ken Singer from UC Berkeley are kind of the two lead characters in that. And Ken runs the Sudarja Entrepreneurship Center at Berkeley, which is sort of the keepers of the Berkeley method, and it's the highest performing entrepreneurship program in a university in terms of the number of alumni raising venture funds and stuff like that. So yeah, so the idea is to take the best practices from around the world, and just in a very systematic way work on building ecosystems from the foundations. I'm sort of a psychology person by background, and so for me, getting things right on the human level before they attack an opportunity improves the opportunities for people to have, big success more often.
Well, you're preaching to the choir because we can talk about it more, but in my experiences, in everything from sports, where I do a lot of analogies compared to sports and founding a company and a team
Yeah.
and placing people as founders, but also as presidents and CEOs to scale the startup, because generally the founder is not the best scaler, if you will,
Mhm.
and the founder is also, has this whole thing about giving the baby to the babysitter for the first time, and what do you do with
Yeah.
that? And when we recruit people for startups, and we do that a lot, we use the words a lot, embrace and thrive on the environment,
Mhm.
because if you don't
Yeah.
embrace it and thrive on it, and the zigzags that you make, going back to that,
Yeah.
you'll burn out. And having a partner or spouse that supports you on that,
Yeah.
all the human stuff that you're talking about, we're very familiar with. And any way I can help in that regard, I'd be happy to, because this sounds like a great purpose and a valuable one. In LA, we say it a lot, leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel. So we might have to do a sequel on this, but I have
All
one last
right.
in this part. We had the pandemic, which one of my clients described once as the year that flew by slowly. And I thought that was a great way to describe it. And sometimes it feels like it was yesterday still, and then also years ago. But with all that said, and now we're deep into 2025, can you share with us briefly what you're most grateful for and also what you're most hopeful for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit spoiled, so I mean, I'm most grateful for my family, my wife and two kids,
Sure.
that they're in good shape. We weren't sure when the twins were born. Both of them would survive.
Hmm.
So very grateful for that. Um,
Well,
I mean, for me, I'm optimistic about the future because think two things. One is that things are cyclical. And I believe that, when things are, getting the worst, that means hopefully the corner will be turned soon. And also just as a person who is about humans, there, and this is actually an epiphany I had as a child, in middle school actually, when I was like very unhappy with the environment.
Hmm.
I was like, people are just so cruel and it's just so awful. And I was negative, and I'm like, and just something clicked in me. I'm like, humans have the intense potential for doing really, really awful things and such transcendent positive potential. When you look at individuals who, when they were born or when they were 13 years old or 25, you didn't know they were going to do what they did. So there's just this deep potential that's there, this latent potential that I don't know how to unlock it, but there's a tremendous resource that's there. And it's buried now under dopamine addiction and under like all this stuff. But I know it's there. And so there's this incredible reserve that when it catches fire, and inspires people to shake off the things that they've taken as reality. I just, so I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen. But there, I always feel tangibly the potential that humans have.
No, I think you're right on, and thanks for sharing that. Well, it is literally one of the purposes of what we're doing right now, Leaders Who Care.
Yeah,
And we also have Leaders
exactly.
Who Care youth who are sharing, like from 8 to 18-year-olds even, that are sharing
Yeah.
what they want to do and what they can do and all that. So together we can actually do that. So I'm grateful that you are a leader who cares, and that what you stated there is right on the money. And I'm actually hopeful for the same thing, because you are a leader who cares,
Nice.
and it's so fantastic, a miracle with your twins, and should always be grateful for that for sure. And I'm sure
Yeah.
they'll go on to be doing great things, as well. So thanks for being on the series, and thanks for being you. And appreciate all your sharing your experiences, and the future looks bright because of it. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it, Mark. I really like you sharing with the world the various examples of what folks are doing. I was watching some of the other things, and yeah, it does a heart good.
Yeah, you bet. And we're going to keep going. So thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.